Press Club, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me here at the Press Club. It's really a distinct honor. And thank you for coming. Jamaica will be celebrating its 60th year of independence from Britain. I noticed you stand out with the visit of the royals, and they were warmly welcomed in Jamaica. The royals do have celebrity status, and our people wanted to see them, meet them, greet them, feel them, shake their hands. But there are, obviously, unresolved issues in countries like Jamaica, former colonies. And those issues are largely put into the considerations of reparations. And that is a live subject in Jamaica. And just to be clear, Jamaica has put in place an institutional mechanism to engage the United Kingdom and other countries in this discussion, this discourse about reparations. But the government of Jamaica is also looking on its own evolution as a nation state. And we got our independence in 1962, which meant that as an independent nation, we took care of our own affairs. One remnant of that era is that the Queen of England is also the Queen of Jamaica, represented in Jamaica by a Governor General, who is the head of our state. I am merely the head of the executive of the state, head of the government. Our discourse so far, as it relates to the change in our status as a constitutional monarch, is about the removal of the Queen as the head of the Jamaican state. And I believe, like many people have, that with the passage of time, the growth of new generations, there is obviously a distance in this consideration. And most Jamaicans now believe it is time that we install our own head of state. And that process has also begun. We put forward a process to examine our constitution, to look at our laws, and to ensure that when we do it in the proper, in the correct way, which would include a referendum, so that our people can have a say in what the final architecture of our nation is. And so we have put in place a well thought out, well-structured pathway towards treating with our full independence in terms of defining who should be the head of our state, and in terms of dealing with the issue of reparations. We don't let these issues detain or detract us from what the critical issues are, because these are changes in form, but the real functionality, the real issue is how do we secure prosperity from our democracy, from our freedom, and from the structure of our governance arrangements. That's the real core issue for us. And as Prime Minister of the country, I've never been distracted from that core issue. So yes, there is a raging debate in Jamaica about our political independence and state as a nation. And it is a concern, a discussion that ought to be had, and we've put in place the mechanisms to treat that. But the real discourse, the real discussion is about our economic independence. When we look at it, Jamaica meandered for many decades in the wilderness of economic distress, of poor fiscal management, which resulted in high debt, of course, we can never ignore the fact that there have been unfavorable external circumstances which have also impacted on our high debt. But the truth is, Jamaica has borrowed to develop, and then we still did not develop significantly. So now, from me and my generation, the post-independence generation, it is about how do we correct the economic errors and profligacy of the past to now creating a nation that is free and democratic, thriving nation, but it is also just, equitable, and economically prosperous, so that our human resources can fulfill themselves inside Jamaica and only leave because it is a choice and not, something you have to do for the economic survival. And that is the real challenge. How do we make Jamaica into a Singapore of the Western Hemisphere? That is a real discussion. Now, there are many entry points in history where Jamaica had the inflection to do that, where things were aligned for Jamaica to take off. And we saw that alignment in the decade of the 50s and 60s. We were right there. If you look at where Jamaica and Singapore were, comparison is made time and time again, we were right there. Singapore took the inflection and looked about their economic independence, and we took another inflection and meandered off. And we have paid the price for it. We have. Now, Jamaica is taking a very practical approach to its development. We recognize that regardless of the geopolitical issues that may exist in the world, the exogenous shocks that we have to withstand, things that happen over which we have no control or cause. But in spite of those issues, we recognize that it is important for us to build strategic partnerships with our neighbors and friends. That we have to use our presence on the global stage. We have to use our foreign policy to support our economic development. And that is what this trip is all about. Jamaica is a democracy by standards of universal adult suffrage now for more than 76 years. Jamaica is one of the 25 oldest democracies in the world. And I dare say that Jamaica is the oldest black democracy in the world. There is no precedent that Jamaica and the United States have shared values, shared ideas, and shared interests. But we've never been able to leverage that for our economic development. Jamaica exists in a neighborhood which we like to think of as a neighborhood of peace. And it is largely so. But you do see signs that there are potential for conflicts. And it is not an entirely democratic region in its composition. And it is a region that is open to many threats. Primarily because of the inability of many states to control their borders and their territorial domains, particularly maritime weak economies that simply cannot invest as much in national security. And that leads to the emergence of a kind of threat from narco elements that are evolving not just street crime level, but are evolving to corrupt governments and take control of governments, which could evolve into a narco-terrorist kind of activity, which we have to pay close attention to. And at the state level, you're seeing that play out in a high level of violence, in particular homicides, and you will see that this region has some of the highest homicide rates in the world. And that has an impact on the growth potential. People who are looking to invest in, it's a politically stable region, but is it safe? How do we treat good security? Security has become a significant cost of doing business in the region, and it is limiting the potential of the region. So, the United States has said in many policy documents that the Caribbean region is their third border. We don't necessarily see the impact of that. I mean, we see the policy projection of that, but it's not a border that is necessarily well secured, or the attention is paid to security. So the U.S. foreign policy interest in the region has largely been about security, but is not at the level of security consideration that rises to support the broader national security considerations, such as developing these economies so that they can be true partners in the security of the region. And so part of my visit here is to see the idea in the minds of policymakers that attention needs to be paid to the region. Lots going on in the world. This is your backyard. You may think everything is safe, but pay some attention to the region and securing the region, not just from a security, military, police, law enforcement perspective, but from the broader economic perspectives, which is where real security comes in. But we've also made some other points in our discussion. There are vulnerabilities existing in the region due to geopolitical actions elsewhere, which is reintroducing inflation, for example, into the economic considerations of governments that, for the last decade, inflation was not really an issue. At least for Jamaica, it was not. We brought inflation down to below 5%. And now, inflation is trending way above that. And that is not just affecting food prices, it is affecting energy. And so, when the U.S. is thinking, and we welcome the announcement of the release of strategic reserves to bring oil prices down, that may have a global effect, but a very negative effect on small developing countries like Jamaica. So there needs to be some strategic direct thinking about how do we secure the region with energy and food as well. And so that was part of the discussion. So in my meeting with the Vice President, which was a very good meeting, I made a point which had an unintended effect. I said that Jamaica, for decades, has been a net exporter of talent to the world and specifically to the United States. And of course, that was met with a chuckle, a laugh, and I won't say my quickly fingers. So, yes, Jamaica has for many years been exporting its talent. We are now at a point where our unemployment rate, having been terribly affected by COVID, has recovered to where about 7%. Now, at 7%, we're very close to full employment. If we're going to grow, we're going to need not just label, we're going to need talent. So the imperative of investing in our human resources, that is now a priority. And so we raised this issue with the United States. How can we be supportive in the development of our human resources so that our growth horizon can be much higher than it is now? And I believe the point has got home, and I believe it was well received. We also made a point that Jamaica and the immediate region should be considered as a friendly near-shore destination for investment. There is no question that there will have to be strategically a realignment of production and logistics capacity closer to the region in territories that are less likely to give geopolitical concerns. And Jamaica is a prime destination. But for us to be that prime destination, we need the human resources to support it. So I believe those two things can be placed in a strategic dialogue to see how we can make Jamaica a strategic location for nearshore operations, both in terms of logistics, in terms of light manufacturing, in terms of creative industries, content creation, in terms of cyber and software development, and in terms of knowledge businesses. And that's the direction and thrust. And I think if we manage to get the working group that we propose together between the Jamaica and the United States to sit now and look at the microeconomics of how we get there, to examine the details and see the opportunities, and to create a plan to secure Jamaica economically, socially. I think that we could very well see Jamaica emerging in the next decade as the Singapore of the region. So with those brief remarks, I thank you.
Well, certainly a lot that we can cover there. And again, if you have any questions, headliners@press.org, please feel free to send them. But I want to start off, Prime Minister, just talking a little bit about your recent meeting with Vice President Harris. This is the last time a Jamaican leader visited the White House was in 1995. Why was that gap so long? What has changed now?
Well, 1995 is a long time ago, so I really wouldn't be able to answer why. But as I said in my opening remarks, Jamaica, through the great support of the United States, was able to achieve the goal of fiscal stability and sustainability. And again, the U.S. Treasury Department, members of Congress, particularly the Black Caucus, did a great job in facilitating us achieving this fiscal sustainability, which really means that we're now on a path of reducing our debt, which gives us fiscal space to invest in infrastructure and human resources. So we will be able to finance our development. That's what it technically means. But we also recognize that we need the support of our critical partners. Jamaica would not be able to do it. No country would be able to do it alone. And we can't sit in Jamaica and be bogged down by kinds of, I would think, outdated political considerations. We need to look forward, be practical, be strategic, work with our neighbor, which is the strongest economy in the world. I think the question should be asked, why has it taken so long? And why has the region benefited more from its proximity to the most powerful economy in the world?
Well, I know that both the White House and your office, they characterize this visit as one to improve diplomatic relations with Caribbean nations. I mean, why is this relationship falling short? Why hasn't the U.S. and Jamaica worked closer together?
Look, the U.S. and Jamaica have worked closely together the people-to-people relationship between Jamaica and the United States is very strong. We estimate that there are about 3 million Jamaicans living in the United States, and about 3 million Jamaicans living in Jamaica. So you can't get stronger than that. So people-to-people, very strong. Government to government, there needs to be work. And there are many reasons. I mean, from our perspective looking on, the U.S. interests can be very narrow. They could be narrow in security. And because it's narrow in that perspective, it might not be facilitating as much for the other concerns that small island developing states have. And I think there has to be a kind of change in all small island developing states. Look at their engagement with the United States and other countries. I have taken a position that we need to demonstrate that we're taking charge of our own affairs. And that first step is to show that we will manage our resources and our finances in a fiscally responsible way so that we can, as I said, finance our own development instead of borrowing to develop or seeking grants to develop. And I think once there is that maturity in addressing these issues, then we can say to the United States, whose structure and response is quite different from other countries. Your response for investments, for example, comes through the private sector. And so there has to be strategic engagement to, say, the government facilitated in the sense of giving access, directing policy, creating legislation. But at the same time, small island developing states need to be able to present economically viable opportunities to the private sector of the United States to come in and invest. I think we're taking that strategy now.
We did mention that Vice President Harris did mention she was giving Jamaica the $20 million for economic development. How are you going to be using that to become?
The specific again. I don't pay too much attention to the specific of what was granted. It is very meaningful and very welcome, and that is for development of commerce in a specific area. And that was put together. She also mentioned the 10 million for youth engagement, which is part of our human resource development. There was assistance mentioned for COVID-19 response, and there was some assistance for CARICOM in general for energy. And so that's great. The big headline is the agreement for a strategic dialogue and the formation of a working group. That's what we're interested in. That is what we want to see. It's important to change the narrative about the region, what we stand for, what we want to accomplish. And I think that's really where I want to focus.
And so the narrative then that you want to see for the region would be the next Singapore, would be, how would you define that? The use of Singapore, as an example, as a metaphor for what we had to accomplish, is that we started to think of it. There are very few new democracies or developing democracies that have transitioned to developed country status. That says a lot about democracy